What's up, folks? This is our episode with Dr. Stuart Sovatsky, who is an expert in the field of spiritual intimacy. He is highly educated, and I felt like this conversation couldn't be more timely, only because in our plastic material-based swipe right generation, I don't think that many people are having conversations about intimacy. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. This was a really fun episode to do. I did really enjoy the book as well, so please go pick up a copy of that. A link for that is below. Also check us out on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. Thank you guys so much for listening. The human experience is exploring the realms of sexual intimacy as we speak to my guest, Dr. Stuart Sovatsky. Stuart, welcome to HXP.
Thanks, Xavier.
You've spent 40 years studying this material, but I really like to just dig into your book. I really liked your writing style. It's very to the point, and I was kind of wondering where the book was 10 years ago when I needed to read it. In the book, you detail your own yogic awakening that happened 40 years ago. What led you to yoga, and what happened when you realized that this was so powerful?
Well, it's a beautiful question, and thanks for asking. It does take me back to my hippie era. I was in college from 1967 to 71, which was maybe now ancient history, but it was the peak era of campuses were just alive with psychedelic exploration and peace movements. And I was, like a good number of my friends, actually it was at Princeton University. On that campus, I was having, mystical experiences, majored in religion, switched from pre-med, biology and chemistry, mainly because I wanted to understand what these psychedelics were all about, and the chemistry was not giving me as good answers as religion courses. So I ended up majoring in East-West religion, but it wasn't until about 2 years after graduating I went to a yoga class, and this was 1972, yoga was barely known, and after my first class I realized that I was in a much more balanced state, but equally impressive as the psychedelic types of explorations. So I went to every class that teacher provided, and eventually he invited us to something called an ashram, a word I'd never heard of. That was probably 1973 or 4, and started going to retreats with something called a guru, who was a totally new kind of person to me too. He was just so loving to everyone, and the way he pronounced my name, I can still remember it. It was with more love and appreciation than I could remember ever before. So one thing after another, I did all that the yoga guru was describing, getting up at 4 a.m., doing yoga with the sunrise, fasting once a week for a day to let the digestion cool down, all kinds of things. And then he offered an initiation, must have been around 75, and that just changed everything. He whispered a mantra in my ear along with about 20 of my friends, and my body sensations have never been the same. It's now 40 years later. I can feel it to this second, and I just kept following the other suggestions that he would make, and that's roughly, the answer to, where did all this begin?
It's very, very interesting. Just only because several years ago, I guess I didn't know at the time it was a Kundalini awakening, base of my spine activated, and I found it a harrowing experience. It was incredibly difficult. Why do you think this is so important? Why is this intimacy between a partner through sex such a sacred experience?
Well, the expanse of that kind of connection can be very simple to very profound. It can be not that much different than just mutually arousing each other. And it can go all the way to you could say, the secret of life, because nobody really gets conceived and born without the semen and ovum connecting to one another. So as soon as we're with another person that way, yeah, it could be anything from a simple kind of hookup, which that word already points to, kind of a very elementary connection. But it can go all the way to certainly making new life.
Do you feel like just the casual kind of hookup, as you said, do you think that's damaging to the more subtle bodies?
Well, nothing is only one way. Certainly, it has an effect of detaching the sexual activity from a committed relationship, and that'll have certain kinds of side effects. But it's kind of challenging to find a partner that you can set a high standard with, and some people do. They set a higher standard and will only go to bed with someone that they feel very close to, and other people will only go to bed with someone after they're married. So, each of these choices has its own strengths and limitations.
I think I fall into the category of not being able to have sex with someone unless I'm deeply connected into the person. So, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that I want to go over, and I apologize if I'm jumping around, but how important is semen retention for the male, in your opinion?
Yeah, that concept has come from India maybe about 30 or 40 years ago. Before that, the idea of semen retention would be only considered kind of pathological. So it's just getting it to be acceptable for the male to delay or completely not have the typical ejaculation. That's a whole new concept. But where I'm coming from is more that it's a reverence for the seed. It's not merely the mechanics of being good at not ejaculating for a long period of time, or for months and months at a time, or years or decades. It's what is the seed, and what relationship can we have with menstruation, for that matter, and for spermatozoa. And the essence of this tantra really is not mechanical. It starts out being taught just the mechanics, but really that's just the first level. It's really to do with respect for life, that the seed is a very powerful thing the body can create. And in that, the man, in this case, develops a very profound relationship with his own body. The semen is not something casual, even though we might think of it that way in our culture. You start feeling, wow. And then what Tantra is saying is that it's not the final substance that the body makes. The semen itself has tremendous amount of information. Obviously, it can create, when united with the ovum, it will create a human body and bring a human soul into our incarnation. So the retention is just the bare mechanics. It's like saying, well, let's put gas in the car, that'll be good, but then just keep your car in the garage. No, there's lots of places you can go to. And that's what I'm describing. First is you can understand your DNA, you can understand the body's capacity to create life. And not only that, the life that created us, and our grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-great-grandparents, until we get to the chicken and egg problem, which is, where did this all start? And if there was parents, then there had to be parents of those parents, until you get to a tracing back, and you kind of wonder, well, maybe God, maybe some source created it that was there all along. Because the chicken and the egg there has to be another chicken or egg behind it. So if you feel connected with your own fertility, and you do a deep meditation on it, which I include in my Advanced Spiritual Intimacy book, I try to guide people backwards in time, you start feeling like, wow, this goes back thousands and thousands of generations, and you can feel it, not just hear it intellectually. And likewise, if you have a child, there's the potential, in whether heterosexual or of a different orientation, people can adopt or create their own children, and their children's children are inside of their children. And you start to look at one's own baby and realize that inside of the baby is the potential for that baby's baby 30 years from now. And you get what I call a perception of the big now. The now is very popular to be in the present, But how big is this now? Is it just a little tiny thing that you're in now? Not at all. In the semen and the ovum is a place to tune into, to feel this now has been going on a long time, and we're part of something. Each incarnation is part of something, a wave of incarnation that is very profound. So this is a broadening of just the practice, the ability to retain semen, just gives you a chance to tune into it and go very, very deeply into the meaning of life itself.
I mean, I find this topic highly intellectual. I mean, we're in a world of Tinder and just these casual kind of throwaway plastic cup hookups. I mean, where would you regard our society as far as understanding how sacred and how profound these experiences are?
Well, I must say you ask very beautiful questions, and I definitely want to thank you for it. And you're putting it in a historical sense to my ear. The Catholic Church was the power structure in our culture that talked about sexuality for a couple thousand years, and they were overdoing it. They were making sex be totally about fertility and procreation, but they didn't really have a well-described path of maturity where couples would, in terms of the male, not just retain semen, but be in such a devotional mood with his partner and she with him, and excuse the heterosexual context, but let me just stay with it for a while. But that the way they would relate to one another, that it would be almost really a natural contraception. In other words, the fertility would be converted into a type of awe, emotions of awe and bliss, and that gives a very different kind of sexual exchange. You can see that this is not taught, even in many tantric teachings, but in some it is taught. And so if casual relations will tend to perpetuate, not necessarily, people are learning new things all the time, but it will not give people a chance to mature to the level of what I'm talking about could even be possible. Freud came along in the 20s, 30s, and 40s and kind of got sex freed up. And ever since the 40s, 50s, 60s, particularly on, it's been like a free-for-all to try to be sexually free. Because for a couple thousand years, people felt tremendously guilty in the West about, according to the New Testament, or I should say more the Catholic Church teachings. So Freud took it a big step forward, of at least it's not sinful, and then it's natural and beautiful. But he could only go as far really as this teenage puberty. And what I'm opening up with Tantra, what the Tantric texts are opening up really, is a puberty that comes our whole life long, in which this new type of eroticism becomes possible.
Right. There's a passage in your book that I really liked. I'm going to read it. It's two people chained to one another in endless causality by their reverberating attractions to one another. Endless irresistibility inciting endless irresistibility. Chemical fusions, reactions of the entire polarized universe. Every glistening radus permeated cell poised, aimed at him, at her, and nothing else is what every living gendered fiber wants, has ever wanted, 100, 1,000, a million years. I mean, wow, that's so powerful, these words. So, I mean, I've had the chance to have tantric experiences. I guess I'm lucky in that sense. And I started meditating, practicing meditation very early on, and I would meditate for hours and hours a day. And I guess this sort of opened me up to being more sensitive to energy and the connection that a person has with their lover. So when I find myself, and this is also why I feel like I'm as choosy or as picky as I am with who I decide to have sex with, but when this is accomplished, I feel like a tantric orgasm is, I mean, it's indescribable. It's on a whole other level than just the physical sense of having an orgasm. Would you agree?
Exactly, and it's helpful because modern science is catching up with being able to name what goes on in this kind of tantric experience. That really you would have to say, or you could say, that the pineal and the center of the brain, known as the hypothalamus, is the source of this other kind of orgasm, and it sends actually everything from oxytocin, which is called the love hormone. Makes people, when you have oxytocin in your bloodstream, you'll fall in love and feel love for the person you're with. Serotonin, which relates to how awake we feel. In LSD sent serotonin off the map. And then even DMT is secreted in the hypothalamus. And melatonin, which makes us feel our sense of time, or you could say timelessness. Also inner light, it occurs when melatonin is secreted in the brain. So what I think we could say your experience that you're describing is that when you establish rapport, energy with a partner, and you have attunement, the energy of each other is going to go all the way up your spine. The most primitive level would be just two people masturbating each other and not even knowing each other. Just the first center at the bottom of the spine. But what you're describing is the energy is moving all the way up and affecting this pineal gland. By the way, many philosophers said that was where the soul lives. And the hypothalamus, which is the sex center of the brain, according to science. By the way, hypothalamus in Greek means the little wedding chamber. And in yoga, that's where the male and female also have a kind of a union, and you feel all kinds of bliss emerging from that chakra, the ajna chakra corresponding to the hypothalamus. So in your experience, what you're describing, science would say that your connection heated up your, not just genitals and heart, where you feel connected to someone emotionally, but it went all the way up and hit the hypothalamus and pineal gland, and your bloodstream got filled with all these hormones that give rise to the feelings that you described and the abilities of perception that you were describing.
Yeah. So, would you say, you talk about a puberty of the spine and how developing or awakening the Kundalini can take couples beyond this traditional idea of Western sexuality. How would you say that this awakening is achieved?
You see signs of it in all the different world religions. So it's so deep into the human nature that it's not just, you have to kind of say it's part of human nature that hasn't been mapped out by modern sexology. If a person has many experiences that you described having, we would be able to say that the body is now functioning at that level. It's matured, it would be my term, not just to ejaculate or have a genital exchange, and then also a loving exchange, which is a heart center, but all the energy naturally goes up and down the spine. And when we do see this worldwide, in prayer forms for sure, Jews have a form they call davening, and they rock back and forth as they pray. It looks identical to Islamic, what's called zikr. They're rocking exactly the same in Judaism and in Islamic religion. In Buddhism, the rocking is brought to a stillness called ujjukaya, and all the Buddhists will meditate with their spines really in what we could call a certain kind of an erection. The spine becomes tumescent. Ujjukaya roughly means the erection of the whole body. And all Hatha Yoga originated when that energy going up the spine would also go out the spinal nerves and make the body dance. And you see this in trance dancing and shamanic cultures. Trance dancing means your body's moving itself. And these movements are very much like the movements of a baby, very young little baby. You can see it, the baby's incarnating himself or herself by the movements they make. Very much like what goes on in the womb. But this process of energy moving in the body so that we further incarnate, see it in babies, see it in fetuses, it can go on one's whole lifetime. And it's very spontaneous. You're not in control of it. It just happens. Like labor contractions happen in a mother, like the movements of a fetus in the womb, making fingers, making arms. You can watch it on ultrasound, and babies certainly do it. But if you tune into that energy, your body will start moving on its own. And yoga of today disguises this fact because all the asanas are done by memorization, by imitation. But for a much longer time, some scholars say 600-700 year period in India, the spontaneous yoga was much more prevalent than trying to hold poses with your ego. And like I say, we see these movements in what they call charismatic religions, religions where people are shaking like holy rollers shake, or like even belly dance. Belly dance is not just an entertainment in a Middle Eastern restaurant, or merely something that is a kind of a sexual way for women to dance. It can happen spontaneously when Kundalini is active in a female body, and the men in those cultures, they feel that they're not just being excited by the beauty of the woman. They feel that the awe of the feminine energy, which is connected to fertility and to the source, that they're being energized by that. So you start to see that the energy of sex, as it keeps changing, it goes up the spine, causes the body to shake and move about. You see it worldwide in all kinds of religions. And this very movement simultaneously moves the energy throughout the whole body. And what I'm saying, it matures the glandular system. It matures it so much that we have to eventually admit that the body goes through a completely new puberty that comes after the teenage puberty.
So, I mean, wouldn't that be an interesting question on a dating site? Is your Kundalini activated? Yes, no. So, I mean, these compounds that you talk about in the brain, DMT specifically, seem to me as like an evolution compound. I mean, when you're activating your pineal gland, it seems like you're orienting yourself to participate in your own evolution through activating these more subtle bodies. But to play devil's advocate here a bit, what would you say the dangers of activating your Kundalini would be?
Well, in a holistic way, there would be very little danger because your character would be maturing, your value system, how fair you are with other people, your family history would be, going well in childhood. But, when in a culture such as ours, people can take up a practice sort of piecemeal and just do like a lot of heavy breathing and not pay attention to how am I living my life, how am I treating people. And you can, to some degree, force these energies to awaken. And that forced way of waking it has side effects for many people. It's not a balanced awakening. Gopi Krishna, who was first to publish on Kundalini in the West around 1970, 1971, he did a forced awakening. He describes it in great detail, that he was sitting for like 15, 16 years and willfully trying to do it. He didn't have singing and dancing, for example. He just was trying to bull himself into this, some kind of an enlightenment. And as a result, his system was too hot. Willfulness creates heat. Just like too much passivity and not much will happen, will be lethargic. But he was way over on the side of being very forceful, and it was. He describes how troubling that was. He was hot all the time, and had many difficulties, and that was in India. So here, like many things, going into a therapy or even a sport. We want to go into it in a way that balances lots of aspects of our life, not just the awakening of an energy.
I mean, I'm imagining all the couples listening to this right now and suddenly getting incredibly aroused. But I mean, you go into some yoga postures. How important are these asanas and the mudras?
When they're done with the mood of devotion or like dancing, then they're fun. And not just fun on a playful way, but it could be the joy of being devotional, of being grateful, of feeling the magic of the ability to move the body. So it's really the mudras, all these different bodily expressions, can come from an emotional place rather than trying to do a technique. And that unlocks their, I would call it their deeper significance. And they're just ways of, like kissing. You can have sex without kissing, but you can have sex with kissing. It's not necessarily a technique. It's out of love, and you enjoy each other. And in that sense, the mudra that fits with kissing involves the tongue. And when the tongue gets sufficiently aroused for enough months and years at a time, its nerves will trigger a kind of orgasm in the pineal gland. So it's the whole body. The fingertips could have types of orgasms. If you're feeling a certain type of joy, you can't see me on your Skype screen, but I'm moving my fingers in all kinds of joyful ways, and you start to get totally liberated. Not just liberated from the guilt-ridden sex, but liberated to express all these wonderful feelings with a partner who's doing it with you. That was the poem you read from my book. It came directly from an experience with a partner, and it was just that magical interactivity. And mudras, but with hand gestures, with tongue gestures, they just come out of the body from where they've been waiting to come out for maybe a long time.
Interesting. I want to talk about marriage and relationships just because it seems like society has changed, and I, more and more through my parents and my friends who are married and have kids now, and I feel this pressure to get married or move into, a serious relationship. And how important is that to what we're talking about?
Well, again, Xavier, you're asking these wonderful, wonderful questions. We have to imagine that marriage is the prize instead of something that will overwhelm us. To fall in love is probably, all would agree, to find someone who falls in love with you, who you've fallen in love with, is just a wonderful, wonderful thing. The possibility that type of love could be strong enough to never exhaust, even through 50 years of ups and downs, of money issues, or having to move around from one city to another, even difficulties in communicating. The possibility that love that you feel when you're in the so-called honeymoon period, if we felt that falling in love would last a lifetime and only get better year after year, who wouldn't want to start at the age of even 18 or 20? You'd be excited to jump right in, because the sooner you find each other, the sooner you'll be able to go through all these different stages. The problem is, Freud only mapped out human development to the teenager and said that's what sex is, and there's not much of a change after that. And all the scientists since then believe him. And no matter how much new data they find about the pineal gland and the oxytocin and all of that, I'm the first one. I've been publishing for about over 30 years now, but it takes a while to change a huge paradigm about human maturity. How far can it go? But if we knew that these puberties were going to keep happening, finding a partner would be like getting to start at the peak years of being a 20-year-old. So instead of feeling pressured by culture, in which we would be in conflict, their expectations, why are they forcing this upon us? It would be completely the opposite. Dating sites would be they would just facilitate people. They'd maybe meet 5 or 10 different people, but nobody would waste any time because they'd feel that energy of attraction. And my book hopes to show people hundreds of different ways to overcome problems, communication problems, sexual problems, problems with money, problems with in-laws, with parents, becoming parents oneself, issues about aging and becoming pretty old, 40, 50, 60, 78, all the way to death, tries to map out all the typical issues, but show how easy and beautiful it can be to go through them with someone. So in that map, the pressure is much more about enthusiasm, I would call it. No one needs to tell us to do it or not do it. It's like if there's a swimming pool on a hot day, people are going to jump right in.
I mean, do you have any advice for a person like me? My last 3 dates were terrible. And I mean, is there a way to move through the more ambiguous kind of, because I essentially am looking for someone who is as aware as I am. And I just feel like relationships are so ambiguous nowadays, and people just kind of are looking for one thing, which is sex, and the sacredness of the experience is gone. And I feel like an alien on a planet, and it's so frustrating. And I don't know. I mean, maybe you can give me some advice on that.
Well, again, you're giving me from your very heart the hopes for love in your very own life. This is, in most interviews, it's much more intellectual, and I really am touched because I can feel your beauty to fall in love with someone and who will fall in love with you and create a sacred container for it that won't just be frivolous, and that you feel great respect for the woman, and for you to meet the woman who would feel that reciprocal connection with you. You're ready for it. And the sadness is that everybody, so many people are very scared and scaring each other. And so you never get much beyond the first or second date because people are calling it quits before it even gets started. That, as a marriage therapist for 40-some years, I saw this beginning to happen. It's funny, as Match.com got going to help people, it also gave people so many possibilities. That alone, and that's not the only way, but if you have lots of possibilities, why stop with the first person? And lots of people are entering into it with meeting somebody, new people, and they're dismissing each other. Well, sometimes just because they have 10 other people on their dating website that they want to check out. And by the time they come back to the other one, the person is either, frustrated, or they found somebody for a little while, or they're so lonely they are willing to just hook up and at least have some human warmth for one night. So it kind of gets all fragmented.
So I'm not sure if you're a fan of Salvador Dali, the surrealist. He, in the late 1920s, he had a very interesting approach. He made a painting called The Great Masturbator, and you can see the evolution of how we view sex, and in the 20s, and you're looking at this guy, and his face is down, like the women, and I mean, he had a really interesting way of kind of classifying how in that period people viewed sex. So I mean, in your experience, is there anything that struck you as profound, or I mean, is there something that you can share with us that kind of changed your thinking?
Yeah, it's a very beautiful question. I think of Dali as giving us images, but they're very much originated in Western culture, where sex and eroticism is very problematic from the Catholic Church on. But in India, for example, we know that you can have images of deities making love with each other in a very different way. Like in Tibetan tankas, you'll see couples in union and fire, and they're looking into each other's eyes, and they're in a very high state of union. Now, I think looking at Salvador Dali, you'll get an experience of the Western unconscious mind of it being very problematic. But if you look at a tanka from Tibet, you'll see images in which it's ecstatic. And we almost, the speediest path I can think of is to try to leave, not leave, but transition from a Western culture, which has a very problematic history in all the artists, many of the artists, Hieronymus Bosch, lots of the artists who tried to depict what was going on in the West, very torturous looking paintings. But if you compare it with the Tibetan Thangka, you go, wow.
Yeah.
If you even have an image of Christ, even flirting with Mary Magdalene, the Catholic Church will boycott everything that you do as an artist. But in India, you have temples. It is a sacred type of connection. You can't just call it people getting it on. It really is much more whole. And then you see how small of a little pond poor Salvador Dali was living in. Of course, he was going to come up with a tortured experience where the best you can do is become the great masturbator.
Yeah, I really like that comparison. I think that's very accurate and well said. So in your book you talk about sublimative passion to fuel yoga movements and postures, getting the body's prana to move where it is needed. And what is sublimative passion, and how does this affect prana movement?
Yeah, the word sublimation is from psychoanalysis. We know something about it, but the Sanskrit word would be urdhvareta, and it translates really as this full blossoming of the seed. And so it's just a continuity with the genital puberty, with the teenager's puberty. It's not kind of a sublimation of it. It's much more of a continuity, and you feel blissful feelings, erotic feelings. The naming is, you want to be sensitive to it so that you can name whatever those feelings are in a way that generates bodily movements. Could be dancing, could be yoga asanas, and as your body you move your body just the way that will make you feel a good feeling. And that's liberation. Liberation in erotic embodiment is we're free to move our body, not just masturbate it like Salvador Dali kind of showed, but you can move your whole body. I can move my finger just a quarter of an inch over here and smile and look until I'm totally free. And I start feeling, I can feel as much joy as nobody's holding me back. It's just in my head. And so I start feeling, wow. That's when I say, I hear you ask me questions and you touch me with your soul. Nobody's stopping me from saying that to you. My mind might say, well, he's a radio interviewer. But then I'll say, I'm not trapped in that. Xavier's asking me about his romantic life. And if I'm not touched by that, I'm missing. And I'm free to say something about it. Likewise, I'm free to move, and then I spread out the capacity to feel bliss, similar to what happens in the penis or vagina or the nipples. But I'm doing it. I'm moving it everywhere, and in that movement it changes. You start feeling, it's very limited to only be about intercourse.
Oh, okay.
It's not only just about intercourse. Is dancing about intercourse? If it was, then nobody could put on a ballet or a folk dancing festival because everyone would think it was X-rated.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So we have to liberate ourselves from this X-ratedness that lets the Eros go everywhere, but not reintroduce, now it's sexual. We know it's that a ballet performance, the women wear tutus, but nobody is rushing with their, band ballet. It's pornography, no one, and so it's not sublimation, it's animation. It's animation with all kinds of emotions until finally, this passion that we restrict it to the genitals. We restrict that passion to the nipples, and it stays there for a whole lifetime. And what you find in this kind of permitting movement, the energy goes everywhere, but it redistributes itself so fully that it's not the same old sexual energy anymore.
Yeah, Stuart, that really woke me up a little bit. That makes a lot of sense to me. So moving on here. So in Eros Consciousness and Kundalini, you talk about tantric celibacy, and I think a lot of Westerners shun celibacy. It's kind of looked down at. I mean, how is celibacy important, and I mean, what do you have to say about that?
It's another super question, and it takes a while for my words to sink in because it's such a huge leap. But celibacy is, in the Catholic Church, has very little in common with what Buddha did, although he also was a monk. It's just like saying every baby is a little bit different, and nobody will argue with that. Just because it's called a baby doesn't mean that they are cookie cutters. It's equally true of celibacies. And so when we go over to something like Buddhism, or even some of the great mystics like Meister Eckhart, or Teresa of Avila, or St. John, some of these high-level saints in the Catholic Church, they awaken this puberty that I was describing. And in that puberty, you have an intermarriage. You start having the male and female energies interacting inside of one's own body. Nothing could be more erotic than that type of experience of feeling the male and female energies in one's or genetic background or chemistry in the same body. That's what yoga actually meant. Yoga was a person in union of the hatha, the sun and the moon, the two great energies in the body, and we're getting them to interact with each other within your own body. And yoga was the outcome, was these blissful types of movements, blissful types of breathing patterns, and finally the whole conscious mind has a kind of a endless orgasm that we call enlightenment. You're just so awake because the energy is marrying inside of oneself that there's, like the Dalai Lama, he's not repressed. He's a monk. People look at him and don't think, oh, but that poor guy. The problem is the poor priests and nuns and monks in Catholic religion, they didn't have much yoga. They had to make good on their vow in a very restricted mode of celibacy. And it proved too much for many of them. It was just too much. But when you travel to the Indian model of the body and all the puberties that I'm describing and this intermarriage, you see it's a joyful thing. I did it for at least 30 years, you could say, in this very solo way. And it was completely a wonderful experience.
Yeah. Stuart, we are approaching the end here. That flew by, but I mean, you describe these cultural barriers, and I mean, how do you think we are being affected by this? Yoga is being practiced more and more through Western society, and people are kind of catching on. I mean, it kind of seems like you and I are ahead of the curve by about 10 or 15 years.
Well said. Yeah, when I was teaching yoga in 1972, they confused the word with yogurt. Lots happened in the last 30, 40 years, but there's only 5% of the Indo-Tibetan archive has even been translated. And it's a problem because so many people have become an expert in those 5%, and they like it. They don't want, it's a bit threatening to believe, there's 15 times more that I don't know. And that's what I wrote the book is for, the next 5 to 10 years of people who, such as yourself, that are interested, and we can have to be humble that we only are just beginning. It's a whole huge cultural transmission from not just India, but China with what they call Nidan, or that's a Taoist Kundalini Yoga, letting all this information in. And we need, how many trillions of dollars were spent on promoting the sexual liberation since the 50s, 60s, and 70s. All the movies and all the music that helps people to at least not feel guilty about sex, we're going to need some percentage of that to transform pornography, for example, so that it's not going back into the first puberty, but it's liberating all the chakras. That's a huge area. Movies, songs, and then yoga classes will have to radically transform so that they're free form and not just flowing, but ecstatically flowing. Everywhere we set our eyes, something probably will be changing. The sense of what a marriage is, that it's a joyful thing rather than a ball and chain, what a baby is. And then the maturity that comes along with it that will eventually eliminate the need for abortions by and large and contraception. The tremendous maturity will change the world, hopefully in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, until where the world will be now will be just as further evolved as I saw what happened between 1949, when I was born, for example, I'd never even seen a black human being until I was about 7 years old. It was so huge. My school was one of the first to have integration. We've come a long way to have a black man in the White House. What will happen in the year 2030, 2040? I wrote that book for myself, if I reincarnate, so I'd have a book start out and somewhat like how you feel about yourself.
Well, Stuart, this conversation has been enlightening, sir. I really, truly appreciate your time. I highly suggest that anyone listening pick up a copy of this. It really struck a chord for me. The book is called Advanced Spiritual Intimacy. Stuart, is there a website that people can go to find you?
Yes, you can get a signed copy if you really would like that by just Googling my name, going to my website. You'll get my email address. I'd be happy to inscribe personal message and mail you a copy. If you want to go quickly, you can just go to Amazon.com, and the book's a bestseller on Amazon.com almost every week.
What is your site called?
My site would be under my name, Stuart Sovatsky, and I think it's called Counseling Services.
Okay, we will make sure that link is available for anyone listening. Stuart, thank you again, sir. It's been great. This is The Human Experience. My name is Xavier, and we are going to get out of here. We will see you guys next week.